Good morning, everybody. It's really a pleasure to be here today. I'm Valeria Cortez. I work as an educational services consultant based in São Paulo, and I'd like to thank you very much for being here today and for sharing this moment with me. I'm here today to share with you some ideas on how to engage our students into the habit of reading as a way of helping them to develop their skills and ultimately contribute to their learning process. I hope that by the end of this session, I have managed to share with you some information or some ideas so that you can carry on, use the suggestions provided, and also use your creativity to develop other ways to work with readers with our students. And that takes us to our agenda of the day, which is to reflect about the reasons for reading. So why read? Why read stories? Then to think about the difference between extensive and intensive reading, and also the benefits of extensive reading for students. Last but not at all least, I will share with you some activities, some before, while, and after reading activities that could easily be done with any readers. So I will share with you the ideas on these activities, and I hope you can deploy them in the classroom or even develop other activities to be deployed in the classroom. And how are we going to do this? So I will present, I welcome your participation, and I'm trying to make this as interactive as possible. You can type your answers or your comments in the chat box, and I'll try to look at them. I'll try to check them during the presentation. And in case I miss any question, the webinar will be recorded so that I can easily go back to the session and check the comments or the questions that haven't been answered. I have switched off the camera because I don't want us to have any kind of delay. So in order to prevent us from having this sort of situation, I've decided to keep the cameras off. I hope you don't mind. And so that you know the session is being recorded so that anybody can have access to that when we finish. So to start with our session today, I've decided to have this little warm-up so that we can engage into the session. I'd like you to have a look at the pictures provided, and we have several characters there. So who are these characters? Do you know them or do you remember them? Do you remember who they are? So people have said Robin Hood, Mulan, Snow White, or Cinderella, Spider-Man, Harry Potter. Yes, that's right. We all know who these characters are. And who do I identify myself with? Well, some people said Cinderella, other people had a laugh, and other people said Mulan. Yes, that's right. I identify myself with Mulan, even though she's much younger and much more beautiful. But anyway, I identify myself with Mulan. And why? Why is that? Well, Mulan is great at fighting. And of course, this is different from what I am. I'm not great at fighting. I'm terrible at fighting. Mulan is from China and I am from Recife. Mulan can ride a horse and I can dance for her. Mulan is young and I'm not young. So these are the differences between Mulan and me. As for the similarities, which I've placed in the middle of the Venn diagram, we both can sing, we both have a brother, we are both brave, and we both show empathy. So basically, these are the similarities and differences between Mulan and me. And I'd just like to share with you the idea that one element of good stories is memorable characters. And this is an interesting idea to be done when the students have finished the book. They can think about their favorite character and fill out the Venn diagram. Then they can share their comments with their friends. And this activity can easily help them to reflect upon a character and engage with the story on a personal level by relating that to the character. Some people have asked me if this can be done with young learners. I believe it can, provided that they draw instead of write the similarities and differences. You can ask them to draw the Venn diagram, or alternatively, you can give them a worksheet with the Venn diagram, and they can just draw or fill out with words and expressions. But basically, this is something to stimulate conversation, especially after they finished a book. Okay, since we're talking about books and stories and memorable characters, I have a question. Why read? Why do students read, or why should students read? Why read stories? Every time I ask this question, I get answers such as to enhance knowledge, to practice, to consolidate language, to have fun, to get acquainted with different characters. Well, there are several answers. But we could say that stories increase learners' motivation. And this is the first key message I'd like to share with you. Stories increase learners' motivation. And why is that? Lots of different words there related to stories. So if we look at these words, we can say that stories represent language in a natural and meaningful context. Learners are motivated by stories because they have a desire to know what's happening and how a story will end. Learners also identify themselves with story characters. So Andrew Wright says, stories offer a major and constant source of life and language experience for children. Stories are motivating and memorable, rich in language experience. So Andrew Wright wrote this in his book, Storytelling with Children, published by OUP. We could say that stories are particularly important in the lives of our children. And why is that? Because stories help children to understand their world and to share it with others. We could also say that children want to find meaning in the stories, so they listen to the stories with a purpose. And a reminder, stories help children to become aware of the general feel and sound of foreign language. Stories also introduce children to language items and sentence constructions without their necessarily having to use them productively. So we are already talking about the benefits of stories anyway. So we could say again that stories increase learners' motivation due to all that. And this is our first key message being revised. And I invite you to have a look at our second key message for this session, which is about extensive reading. We could say that extensive reading improves And people have different answers. Improve knowledge, improve skills, improve motivation. We could say that extensive reading improves skills. So that's the second key message I'd like to share with you. Numerous studies have reported that extensive reading can help students improve not only reading skills, but also vocabulary, spelling, grammar, listening, and writing. But what does extensive reading mean or entail? What does it entail? Let's have a look at this question. What do these activities have in common? What do you think? People have different answers, such as they both entail practicing, they are both activities in which people need to get deeply involved. So they are all different ideas, but we could have a look at what Verissimo says. He's one of our specialists in extensive reading. Let's see what he says about that.
I compare reading and establishing a reading habit with students by going to a gymnasium. What helps about going to the gymnasium is the habit. It is not the same going on Saturday morning for 3 hours. It is best to go 1 hour each day, Monday, Wednesday, Friday. The same thing with readers. It is very important to build a habit in reading and to be part of your daily routine. Okay? I also compare it that we all learn a language. We have all learned our first language. So we don't need to know the specifics of grammar and grammar tenses to be able to use the language any more than we need to know about the different muscles or anatomy when going to a gym. Going to a gym and doing the exercises works for us in making us fit. The same thing with readers. In reading, we are learning the grammar, we are learning the vocabulary, but unconsciously.
That's very interesting. So, just quoting Verissimo, going to a gym and doing the exercises works for us in making us fit. It's the same for readers. Through reading, we learn the grammar, we learn the vocabulary, but unconsciously. So readers cover the same content as the course books: verbs, nouns, past simple, present perfect, but that helps the students to retain all that unconsciously in the way they learned their own language as children. And that leads us to think about graded readers. What are graded readers? What are they? And some people say, oh, they are books that have been adapted for learners in general. Yes, we could say that graded readers are books that have been written for a certain level of language learner. The different elements in it, which normally include vocabulary, grammar, illustrations, design, cultural references, have all been carefully planned so that the language learner can read it fluently. Graded readers give the students the opportunity to see language they learn in a classroom environment using in the context of communicative something, usually a story. This helps them to revisit the language. And reading for pleasure, finishing a book, or choosing their own book to read can give learners a great sense of satisfaction. Reading all the books in a series can provide the students with a great sense of progress and achievement. Then it's difficult to speak about graded readers and the benefits without connecting the topic to extensive reading. After all, graded readers are most often used for extensive reading. Then what's the difference between extensive and intensive reading? And some people say one is reading for pleasure, which would be extensive reading. Intensive reading, it's reading to reflect upon certain elements of language. Some people said that. What could we say? Well, we can see here some differences between extensive and intensive reading. Starting with extensive reading, we could say that extensive reading can help students improve not only reading skills, but also vocabulary, spelling, grammar, listening, and writing. So the skills in general. When students read extensively, they read over a period of time. They should know almost all the words on a page, and they should not use a dictionary, ideally. In extensive reading, they read primarily in order to enjoy the experience of reading. They may not know all the vocabulary and grammar, but they can understand the text without too much effort, and they can enjoy what they are reading. On the other hand, in extensive reading, students have contact with shorter texts, with specific language aims and tasks. They are reading a text in order to learn something about the language itself, maybe a new word, some grammar, and so on. We would call it study reading, in inverted commas. So this is the typical reading many students do in the textbooks. So we could see the difference now between extensive and intensive reading. Reading to learn, intensive reading, as opposed to learning to read when it comes to extensive reading. But please note something, that the key thing here is to use the two approaches concurrently. Intensive reading is a far more common approach, but we should consider a balance between intensive and extensive reading if we really want our students to improve. A balance of intensive and extensive reading again. So we have talked about the features of intensive and extensive reading, the differences, the importance of reading, graded readers. And now it's time for us to look at how extensive reading can benefit our students. And then I have a question for you. What's the benefit of extensive reading for our students? Could you please tell us? And some people say, well, extensive reading helps students to increase vocabulary. Extensive reading enables the students to see words in context, to see language in context. Extensive reading is engaging. Extensive reading helps the students to build the habit of reading. Well, there are many benefits. We could go on talking about them, and the list would be just huge. I will just share with you some of the benefits we've reflected on. Let's see. So, benefits of extensive reading. We could say that listening and speaking skills improve. So extensive reading helps the students to improve their listening and speaking skills. But somebody asked me, how can it help speaking? We could say that students become familiar with the patterns in English, that is, how people speak. And this helps them when they try to speak themselves, because they retain the chunks of language and they can retrieve them when appropriate. So this is one of the benefits. Also, writing skills improve. That's a second benefit, and somebody mentioned it. Good readers also tend to be good writers. Similar to the other benefits, this is because they see the words in context, as we know. And also they see words, or they are exposed to collocated patterns. They see how the words go together. For example, instead of saying big rain in English, we say heavy rain. And this is something they get acquainted when they are reading. They become familiar with the rhythms and forms of the language, including formal, informal situation, writing styles. So eventually they will improve their writing skills. Motivation is another benefit, of course. What was the first book you read? Many people don't remember that. Well, I remember one of the first books I read. It was The Great Gatsby. But it was not the first book, of course, but one of the first books. Of course, it was a graded reader. So for many students, or for many readers, the moment when they finish a book for the first time in a language other than their own is an amazing feeling. When a student finishes a book for the first time, he or she will feel like this, on the top of the world. Also, vocabulary, we can't forget that. And this is something everybody always mentions. It helps learners to increase vocabulary. Everybody knows that vocabulary is important, but we also know that it's difficult for students to remember vocabulary. This is because with limited class time, students aren't exposed to vocabulary often enough to retain it in their memory. So reading large amounts of texts helps students to meet the words, to meet the new words, and keep meeting the same words again and again. This helps with retention and internalization of the language. It also helps the students learn how to use the words, which is very important, because they are always in context. This benefits is great to point out to our students and their parents who see mastering vocabulary is important. And then I have a question to you. How many times do we need to meet a word, meet in inverted commas, to really learn it? Do you know? Some people said 5, some people said 10, some people said a bit more, between 15 and 20. That's interesting, isn't it? Most research shows that students need to meet in inverted commas, okay, not really meet, see a word 15 to 20 times before they actually master it, before they actually know it. The problem with just intensive reading or using most textbooks is that due to a focus on new language, there often isn't enough recycling of language from unit to unit. And extensive reading will solve this problem because students will meet language and language patterns again and again. The more they read, the more it happens. One interesting point is that extensive reading helps with increased reading speed and moving students from reading word by word to reading chunks or sentences. And the more they do it, the faster it happens. You can't be a good reader if you are reading at the word level, word by word. Your brain is focusing so hard on the individual words that you can't focus or recall the full meaning of the sentence or passage. So extensive reading will help to build reading fluency. And one of the greatest benefits of extensive reading is what we can actually read here. The more you read, the more things you will know. The more that you learn, the more places you will go. By Dr. Seuss, who I believe you all know. So, readers will learn a lot about the world around them, and books can take them in their minds and on the pages to places maybe they can't go yet around the world, or even to outer space, or other planets and other cultures. So it actually helps learners to increase their knowledge of the world. I really like this quote. That's why I decided to put it here, to include it here. So we could say, based on all that extensive reading helps students to improve skills. And just recapping our second key message. But for that to happen, for our students to improve skills and benefit from the habit of reading through extensive reading, we need to engage them. We need to get them curious. And how do we do that? We do that through activities. We do that through activities. Activities stimulate curiosity. Activities encourage them to look closer at the story and also encourage reflection upon what has been read. Activities also enable the students to expand and enhance their perceptions. We have looked at the benefits of extensive reading. We have reflected upon them. We have thought about them. Now it's time for us to look at some activities that can be done with our graded readers. And believe me, they can be done with any reader, any book. There are many, many examples you can find on the web, on the internet, and also on Oxford website. I have provided links to the website in the presentation, so you can easily have access to some of the activities I mentioned and to other activities. So let's have a look. Well, our students have the material, they have the book, and they need to start reading, or we want them to start reading. So what can we do before we actually start the process so that students get engaged? And before that, even, what are before reading activities for? What's the purpose of having before reading activities? Well, I've already said something. We need to get them curious. That's one of the purposes. Well, before reading activities connects students to the story and spark their curiosity. Okay. It's important to get the students curious before they actually start, because if they're not curious, how will they read? It's important to have before reading activities to hook them, to get them engaged from the outset. And can we think about some examples of before reading activities? I have a couple of examples, but some people said, well, explore the cover, show the cover, ask some questions. I have some questions here, or some suggestions here, sorry. We could ask about the front cover and the back cover text, because remember that there is a back cover text and it sometimes finishes with a question. So we could get the students to read that and predict what's going to happen. We could have them guess the plot, and I have an example to show you on how to do that. And of course, you have your own ideas as to how to do that as well. But we could get them to guess the plot by showing them some titles of different chapters, and through that they can guess the plot. Or some pictures in the wrong order. They could put them in order and try to guess the plot. We could see what they know about the topic. If you just ask them about The Great Gatsby, they might know something, because some time ago there was a film about that, so they might have seen it. In-book activities, don't forget that the readers that you adopt do have in-book activities for before, while, and after reading. Sometimes we don't remember that, so that's a reminder. So let's see. This is one of the classic activities, if we may say so. We can ask them about the front cover. You can little by little unveil the cover as you ask some questions. Questions such as, what do you see here? There's something in red, what would that be? Something, an object, what's that? And you could unveil that little by little. What kind of story is that? Somebody would say Aladdin. Oh, it's a lamp. Yes, that's right, it's a lamp. So what's the story about? What's the title of the story? They would say, oh, it's Aladdin and the Enchanted Lamp. Yes, that's right. And you could do that with any book. You could elicit what students already know about Aladdin and his magic lamp. Have they ever heard of this story before? Where? Do they know anything else about the story? Have they seen a film about the story? What do they know? Okay, so that's one of the very simple activities I've brought here. As said before, you can explore the back cover. There is usually a summary there, and sometimes we don't even notice that, or we don't see that. And it's interesting because it could also be used as a pre-reading activity. For example, here we have, in a city in Arabia, there lives a boy called Aladdin. He's poor and often hungry, but one day he finds an old lamp. When he rubs the lamp, smoke comes out of it. And then out of the smoke comes a magical genie. With the genie's help, Aladdin is soon rich with gold and jewels and many fine things. But can he win the love of the Sultan's daughter, the beautiful Princess Badr al-Badur? What do you think? And you can throw the question to the students. They can discuss in groups. They can predict the plot. They can predict what's going to happen. They can share their perceptions. And then you can invite them to look at the book, to read the story, and find the answer. So they'll be interested in reading to find out if Aladdin can win the love of the princess or not. Well, you could do that with any reader. It's simple but effective. Another interesting activity, I quite like this one here. You can select some keywords and throw them. Okay, just put them like that. Put them on the board and get the students to look at the words and try to guess what the story is about. What's the title of the story? What's the story about? So we have there artist, young and good-looking, wealthy gentleman, attic, changes, evil, secret. By the way, Achieve Languages adopts one of this book. Well, adopts this book here, this book I'm talking about. This. So you will know that. Well, hopefully. So what's the story about? One of the teachers said, well, it's about an artist who painted a picture of a young and good-looking man. This man was actually a wealthy gentleman. And this wealthy gentleman kept the picture in the attic. And as time went by, some changes happened to the picture. And eventually the students will tell you the whole story. But the thing is, this will enable them to find out what the story is about, will keep them talking. They can do it in pairs, they can do it in groups, and then they can tell you what the story is about, and you could show them the book then. which is in this case a picture of Dorian Gray. For the ones who know the story, they might tell the whole story, or at least almost the whole story, because they will say that the picture was kept in the attic and it kept changing, but his evil face was actually reflected on the picture, and he remained young, but this was a kind of a secret. Nobody knew that. He was the only person who knew that he would remain young and the changes would happen in the picture. Well, probably that. You know the story, so I won't need to tell you the whole story because you know that. Or if you don't know, you can read it. That's an invitation, an invite for that. I really like this activity, and it can be done with any books. If you want, if the students are too young, instead of having the words, you could actually put some pictures that are related to the story. Still about the picture of Dorian Gray, what can you see here? Do you know? And some people said the title of some chapters. Yes, that's right. We have the title of some chapters. We could get the students to look at the titles, put these titles in order, in the order they appear in the story. Well, or in the order they think they appear in the story. And then you can show the results. So first is the artist, then the friend, the young man in love, the thief of time, and the death of love. Well, there are more chapters. I just put some of them here. Just to let you know, you can find this activity in Oxford website. There is a part of the website devoted or dedicated to readers. If you click there, the website is provided here. If you click there, you will see information. You will see information about various readers, various series such as Bookworms, Dominus, Read and Discover, Read and Imagine, and links to other websites, to worksheets, to correlations, activities, answer sheets, and everything. So it's all there. Handbooks. And my advice is for you to have a look at that. I'm sure you will find interesting things to do with the students to take to classroom. Many of the activities are photocopyable, so it's really an asset. Don't forget that we also have in-book activities. So, for example, Around the World in 80 Days, we have a before reading activities. Halfway through the book, we have some reading checks or while reading activities. And in the back of the book, after reading activities and projects. So we shouldn't underestimate that because it's all there. Another example, Oxford Read and Imagine. It's hard. It's one of the readers that teachers adopt. So as you can see, we have before reading activities. You can explore the front cover. The questions are even there. What can you see? How many children are there? Where are they? Do you like sunny days? So you have some options of activities. Okay, so halfway through, I propose some while reading activities. Okay, students seem to like the book. So why should we do while reading activities? And some people said to check understanding, some people said to clarify doubts, some people said to check whether they're reading. Well, all that is true. We could say to revisit the text for language purposes, skills practice too. Not only that, also, as everybody said, to check if they need anything, if they need any help. Also to keep them motivated, because they might have engaged in the very beginning, but they need to continue the process, and for that they need to be motivated. So what kind of while reading activities can we do? Any ideas? People always say something. They always say, well, we could have some true and false statements, or we could have, again, an activity whereby the students could put the chapters in order, and they can only do that if they've read the book. True. They can do only, because you could do that as a pre-reading activity too. They will guess the plot. While as a while reading activity, if they've read the book, they can actually do it properly. Well, there are a number of activities that can be done. I have some suggestions here. Jumbled list of events instead of chapters. I'll show you an example. Short summary of the story with some factual mistakes. I quite like this one. I think it's very interesting, and again, it can be done with any reader. We also have some split sentences for the students to match. So let's have a look at the first one. Jumbled list of events. Well, this is taken from the book, Get Us Out of Here. And this is also adopted by Achieve Languages. Basically, I've read the book and I've selected some sentences. So the sentences are in the wrong order, and the students would need to have a look at those sentences and put them in order, basically. But they can only do it properly if they've read the book up until a certain page. If they haven't done that, they can't simply do the exercise correctly, because it's not that obvious. Any ideas? Which would be the first sentence, and the second, and the third, and the fourth, and the fifth? Let's see. Let's check. Okay, so the first one would be, "Where are you going?" said Max. "There's a knitting competition at a big store. Let's go." Soon Alice, Rosie, Ben, and Max were at the store. They were all in a small room. Max tried to open the door again, but he couldn't do it. Alice went to the window and shouted, "Help!" So the students can only reach that conclusion if they've read the first few pages of the story. In case they haven't, they won't be able to reach this conclusion here. So that's one of the examples. Another example, and this is from The Phantom of the Opera. Short summary with factual mistakes. Let me remind you of something. When I mention mistakes, I'm not talking about grammar or language mistakes. I'm actually talking about factual mistakes. So basically, you can write a short summary of the first few chapters. This was done after chapter 2, by the way. So you write a summary of the first few chapters, and you put some incorrect information related to characters, to places, time, okay? And get the students to check and to correct the mistakes. They will only be able to correct the mistakes if they've read the book. In case they haven't, they won't know. For example, here we have, when Angie Sorelli sees a farmer in the steakhouse, all the opera singers talk about it. And if the student has read the book, he will know that it's not Angie Sorelli, but Christine, and it's not a farmer, it's a ghost, and it's not steakhouse, it's opera house. So they will be able to find all the mistakes. They can do it in pairs as well, and you can check that. I really like this activity. And this can be done for any book. And by the way, I took this summary from Oxford website dedicated to readers. When I clicked on bookworms, I could have access to a before reading, while reading, and post reading activity of the Phantom of the Opera. And there were others as well, not only about the Phantom of the Opera, but about other titles. And I took out this activity, but it can be done with any reader, as said. Another one, and this was not from Oxford website. This was from another source. So you can have access to a dialogue from any of the readers. This one, for example, was taken from Sherlock Holmes, The Norwood Mystery. So H.G. Holmes and W. Watson, as you know. And you get the dialogue, you take the dialogue from there, and you show the dialogue on the board and get the students in pairs to complete it orally, of course. They can continue the dialogue, and you can select one or two groups or pair of students to come to the front of the classroom and present their dialogue and act out their dialogue. And that was a wonderful breakfast, Holmes. But life in London is not what it was, Watson. What do you mean, Holmes? Well, all the clever criminals these days. And mind you, some students continued this dialogue by saying, "Oh, I believe they are in Brazil." They have moved to Brazil. Students are so creative. And that was true. And they kept on. They continued. So this can be done with any reader again. Other activities, you could have some questions just like that. Who would you most or least like to meet from the story? Who reminds you of someone you know? Who is similar in some way to you? So these are different questions that can be asked, and you can create or you can develop other questions as well. And this can also be done when they finish the book as an after reading activity. Don't forget the in-book activities. For example, this is from It's Heart as well. And what I find really interesting is that the activities are all signposted. So when you finish this part here, you can get the students to go to page 15 for activities as signaled. So they look at page 15, and there is an while reading activity related to vocabulary. So the students will be able to check the vocabulary and retain that. Okay, so our students have completed, they have finished the book, and it's time for them to do an after reading activity. Why should we have an after reading activities? What is that for? And some people say for students to remember the story, for students to consolidate learning. Well, all that is correct. We could also say after reading activities, what are they for? To give students a chance to consolidate their reading and to respond creatively to what they have read. Can we have some examples? Can we think about some examples? And some people say we could have a play. We could get the students performing a scene. We could have a student producing a poster about the book. Well, there are several examples. I'll provide you with some. Interview a character. And I really like this one, and I will tell you why. Perform a scene. Write a mini saga. Use a graphic organizer and post a presentation. Interview a character. This one is really exciting. Well, we could split the class into 2 groups or 3 groups, depending on the number of students you have. And you can invite one of the students to be the character. So the groups will prepare the questions after being told who the character to be interviewed is. But the key thing is that the character himself or herself also prepares some questions. But the groups won't know that. The groups think that they will interview the character and that's it. They don't know yet that the character himself or herself will also interview the groups. So everybody's preparing. At the end, character comes to the front of the classroom, sits down and waits to be interviewed. The groups interview him or her, and when they finish, the character asks the audience a couple of questions, 3, 4 questions, and the audience has to answer the questions. So that's really engaging. Performing a scene. It could be a scene which is described in the book. It could be a dialogue from the book itself. Yes. Alternatively, you could have different groups in the classroom performing a chapter, performing a scene from a chapter, or alternatively, you could ask the students to write a scene that is not in the book. Something has been mentioned in the book, but the dialogue is not there. For example, and Mary wrote a letter to her parents explaining what had happened. Well, the letter is not there, and also the scene in which she's writing the letter and the scene in which her parents are receiving the letter and reading that and reacting is not there. So you could actually get the students to write the scene and perform it. Write a mini saga. A mini saga is a story in 50 words without the title of the book or any information about the author. It simply tells the story, so they could do that. They could have a poster presentation. They could develop posters. They could produce posters to advertise the reader they've just read. They could put an illustration, the title, 1 or 2 key sentences or key words, and you could have a poster presentation, or could display the posters on the wall and invite other groups to come and have a look at the posters. And the students could answer questions about their posters, or you could show that to parents, for example. And graphic organizers. What kind of graphic organizers? And some people said, oh, we could have Venn diagrams, like the one I showed in the beginning. Yes, we could have graphic organizers, but we could have Venn diagrams as well. But there are other types of graphic organizers. Let's have a look. Well, you can have access to several examples of graphic organizers used for different purposes. All you have to do is click on the link provided, and that will take you to the graphic organizers and also other kinds of activities that can easily be used in the classroom. This one is very interesting, a memory game. And again, it could be done with any book. Basically, all you have to do is produce some cards for the memory game, copy 10 sentences from the story, underline a keyword in each sentence, write the sentence on each card without the keyword that you selected, and write the keywords on a card on different color. So you could have sentences in one color without the keywords, and all the keywords written on other cards in different colors, just like the examples here. And the students could play memory game. This is very nice, and it's easy to produce. Multi-choice swatting. Okay, so another example of something very easy to do. Basically, all you have to do is show a dialogue or a scene on the board and take out a word from the text and display some alternatives. Display some alternatives there. So the students would need to insert the word by selecting one of the activities, insert the missing word. But instead of just going there and writing the missing word or saying letter A, letter B, letter D, you would display the letters on the wall. So you would show the dialogue or the scene with the missing word and the alternatives. You would display letters A, B, C, and D on the wall. And you would split the students into groups, group A and group B, and each group would have to select a representative for the group. The moment you say go, the representatives would run and hit the letter that corresponds to the right answer. Let's see the example here. We are making a, says Ben. No, says Rosie. It's a tree house. They will only know it if they've read the book. If they haven't read it, well, they will choose or they are bound to choose a wrong answer. I find this interesting too. And again, it can also be done with pictures. The key thing is that the students will find it engaging and fun, and learning has to be fun. So that's it, a tree house. Another reminder, don't forget that the books bring post-reading activities, projects, for instance, this one here. And the projects will help students to engage and also to create and deploy the knowledge in a situation related to their context. And therefore, learning will be meaningful. Last but not at all least, the story web. Well, this can be done again for any story. Basically, all the students have to do is they have to think of a story they know well, for example, Cinderella. They need to write the title of the story in the middle of the web, and they can complete the information in each of the circles. So who are the characters? When does the story happen? Why? What's the situation? What's the context? Where? What? And after they've completed that, you can get them to stand up and mingle, and then they can talk about their story webs with other people. This can be done after reading a book. It has a nice structure that supports the students to think and talk, or think and write. And on this note, I'd like to finish our session by recapping the key messages of today, which are: stories help to increase learners' motivation. Activities help to enhance curiosity and reflection. And extensive reading is important because it gets the students to improve skills. So it was a pleasure to be with you today. And in the beginning of the presentation, I said that my aim was to share some ideas or suggestions on how to make the most of readers in class through activities before, while, and after reading activities. I hope I have succeeded in sharing these ideas with you. And if you have any questions, you can send me an email or send Sandra an email and she will forward that to me. I hope you can make use of these activities and create other activities in order to engage the students in the learning process by making the most of readers in class. Thank you very much and have a nice week.